as ever, a big welcome to the show.
You?
Me?
Sit down now.
No, I don't want to sit down.
Sit down.
You're pregnant, yeah?
Come on, sit down, yeah? You think you're a big man, yeah?
Do that again and you can do one out of this building. Welcome back. Ex is at war. Aaron and Claire, they don't like each other. She's been here quite a few times. It's the fourth boyfriend that she's brought back here. This one lasted 8 weeks, 56 days, in which time apparently he turned into a stalker. She's pregnant or might not be pregnant. She's here to do a pregnancy test. They're shouting at each other.
Can you shut the fuck up?
Jeremy Kyle. A TV presenter, radio host, and a bit of a meme gone sour in the eyes of most by this point. You could describe him as someone quite loud, opinionated, judgmental, and all in all, I think, a bit of a wanker. He's best known, what a surprise, for the Jeremy Kyle Show, which is either a very narcissistic or a very lazy title. I'll let you decide. This now infamous show, produced for almost a decade and a half by ITV, was at one point something like a weird, twisted staple of British television. It was both widely praised and criticised for the whole of its tenure, being discussed regularly on the news, parodied in the media, and even poking its toe in a courtroom or two.
Because I think you're one of the best broadcasters on television. You
my friend.
cover a range of shows. You're incredibly smart at what you do. You're very successful at it.
When it first started on TV, I thought, oh my God, this is awful. This man's a maniac. Why are they doing it to these poor people? And then I grew to like what you were doing very much indeed.
But really, if you brush all the opinion polls, ratings and differing statements out of your way, it's clear that the Jeremy Kyle Show was nothing but sick from the very beginning. If a gun was put to my head and I was told to describe the Jeremy Kyle Show in 5 words, these are the ones I would choose. Self-righteous, exploitative, cruel, malicious, evil. There is only one good thing, and I mean one good thing, to ever come out of this heinous television programme. And that is this footage right here.
Give me the envelope. You might have heard of cuts on ITV, but you can have the damn envelope if you want it. There you are.
Thank you very much.
You could be as good a father as you are envelope collector. The world.
Nowadays, of course, this show is probably less known for clips like this and more known for leading to the death of one of its guests in 2019. Since the tragedy, the door has been kicked open effectively, and all the dirty secrets and doings of this show have been laid out for all to see, many of which this show had been accused of many times for years before its cancellation. So what exactly was this show then, and what made it so despicable? When did it start, and what finally shut this monster down? Well, today I invite you to come with me, Mother Moocake, and I will not only answer these questions for you, but also show you just how depraved of a daytime TV show this was. We begin this story with ITV, a broadcasting corporation based primarily in the United Kingdom. At the start of the millennium, ITV was hungry for some trash TV. You know, the kind of garbage that you stick on when you're really hungover and there's nothing else to do, and you're just kind of not really paying attention, you just need background noise to half pay attention to. ITV had been eyeing up the various tabloid talk shows of America for quite some time, by the looks of things. These shows had been immensely popular in the late 90s and early 2000s, with notable piles of this televisual shite, including The Jerry Springer Show and Dr. Phil. Tabloid talk shows, by the way, are the nice, official-sounding name that these sort of shows give themselves in an effort to disguise just how abysmally shallow and crap they actually are. ITV, however, wanted to replicate and bring this disease of a TV genre over to sunny old Britain. Since 1998, the broadcasting network had been peddling a morning talk show called Trisha, which initially started as a light-hearted chat show, but soon began to copy the trash TV of America more from the 2000s onwards. Apparently it was especially influenced by our old friend Jerry Springer, but it was still far from the antics and drama of that particular role model. The stories on this Trisha show usually revolved around infidelity, or how troublesome and dangerous teenagers were these days. You get the idea. Trisha would eventually be discontinued in the end of 2004, and with a slot to suddenly fill, ITV seemingly decided to really double down on getting its own version of the Jerry Springer Show going. They eyed Jeremy Neil Kyle as the man for the job. Born in 1965 in Reading, England, his dad, and I shit you not, was the personal secretary and accountant for the Queen Mother for about 40 years. The Queen Mother, just in case you're not sure, is the mother of the current reigning king or queen. So in this scenario, it was the mother of dear old Queen Elizabeth II. And all this basically gives you all the context you'd ever need about Jeremy's upbringing and childhood and values. I mean, his education clearly reflects his dad's wallet anyway. He was privately educated for the whole of his time in school before eventually going on to study history and sociology in the University of Guildford in England. From around the mid-80s onwards, Jeremy had several different jobs all across the board while he seemingly found his feet. He worked jobs like recruitment consultancy and life insurance sales. I've also done a stint in a life insurance firm. And if you told me that it was that job that broke Jeremy Kyle and his sanity and led him on to create his depraved television show, I wouldn't be remotely surprised. By 1996, anyway, he was seemingly sick of life insurance and moved on to radio advertising instead. Eventually, after working a few local radio stations, old Krusty Kyle would wind himself up a job on the now deceased Capital FM, which at the time was one of the biggest radio stations for the south of England. He had his own grand spanking show on said radio frequency called Jezza's Confessions. I know. The premise was pretty damn simple. Listeners would ring in and confess their big secrets while Jezza listened, mediated, offered advice, or just shouted at them. Does it sound familiar to you at all? The confessions could be anything from drama and basic gossip to stories of cheating, drug abuse, and domestic violence. And based on the fact that the radio gave the listeners and the callers in a certain level of anonymity, it meant that the stories were usually a lot more extreme and over the top. So surprise, surprise, Jezza's Confessions was a bloody hit. It was so popular, in fact, that the show continued on another 2 completely different radio stations after Jeremy had left Capital FM. He left Capital FM, went to a new place, continued the show, and then went to another new place again, and the show kept going. It seemed then to be the perfect gig, but our friends ITV reckoned that the formula could be just perfected a little bit more. By translating it into a TV show, and with a few further refinements, Jezza's Confessions would transform into its final form, like some fucked up version of a Pokemon evolution. And lo, the Jeremy Kyle Show was born. There was, however, one tiny little matter that Jeremy and ITV had to quickly address, one that I'm sure won't come to bite anyone in the arse later on. No. You see, the USA and the UK, they've obviously got different laws around broadcasting and television and that sort of stuff. In the US, you can essentially get away with faking and scripting parts of your tabloid talk show. So if shit is getting slow, or if it's not juicy enough, the cameras can be quickly cut and something can be cooked up behind scenes to make it a bit more interesting. The UK, however, has different broadcasting laws to America. Ofcom, the regulator of TV and communications services in the UK, has this little clause here. And what this basically means is you cannot portray events that are fake, scripted, or tampered with as real. There are only 3 ways, as far as I can tell, that you can get around this little regulation. Number 1, you make it so painfully obvious that your program is a gag or a spoof that you'd have to be medically brain dead not to realise. Number 2, favoured by paranormal investigating shows and stuff like that, you put a little disclaimer at the start just saying something like, everything shown here is for entertainment purposes only. And finally, of course, number 3, you actually fucking do every single thing for real, 100%. Anyone want to take a guess which of those 3 options the Jeremy Kyle Show went for? That's right, it's option 3. And so every second of that show's tenure is completely real. There's no fake segments, no scripts, not even a little tampering off camera to up the antics. It's 100% authentic. In order to produce the same dramatised results of the Jerry Springer Show in his scripted moments, the Jeremy Kyle Show had to compensate and become instead a well-oiled and ruthlessly efficient machine designed to create and capture as much chaos as humanly possible. The Jeremy Kyle Show opened its doors for business on the 4th of July 2005. God bless America, am I right? Over the next 14 years, this disgusting little programme would go on to churn out over 3,000 episodes, with somewhere around 20,000 guests appearing on it during its lifespan. Here's how the show's format would typically go. We'd start with this massive prick welcoming us to his shit show and giving us a brief overview of the drama to come. He'd introduce some names, give us a few key facts, and then he'd begin to invite the guests on, usually starting with the one we're meant to side with. Jeremy would then question them about their troubles, doing his best to pretend that he cares about whoever the fuck he's talking to, all the while trying to encourage them to slag someone off. That someone will be sat in the back room, watching a live feed of Jezza and his pot stirring up on stage. Meanwhile, the audience and Jezza and his guest will have an equally good view of the person in the back room and their increasing temper. The second the cameras start rolling in this place, there's basically nowhere private you can go. Even when you're waiting behind the scenes to go up, or desperately trying to escape the carnage and the shouting on stage later on, it doesn't matter. There's nowhere you can go where you won't be filmed. Eventually, anyway, our antagonist will either be invited up front, or will just barge up there on their own. And from there, Jeremy could basically just sit back and let the fireworks happen, occasionally butting in to do a bit of mediating. Yeah, right, mediating. He just calls it that to make him feel good about himself, of course. But if you look at it and possess even half a brain cell, you can tell it's quite clearly not that.
Don't deserve to be a mum.
Different when you're wanting the money off my mother,
Why don't you be quiet? I'm listening to him. Go on.
From there, the guests will usually fight and argue enough on their own, and that will produce more than enough content for those hungry producers waiting behind the scenes. The drama would typically be concluded with the infamous lie detector test, where one of the guests would be strapped up to a polygraph test and questioned about all that's unfurled on the programme. Then Jeremy, with the results in hand, would reveal the ultimate truth of the matter and then deliver judgment like the colossal fucking egomaniac that he is. And with that, the matter would be closed, and after a quick ad break, Jezza would immediately whoosh us on to another feud, because yes, one dysfunctional argument is not enough. The Jeremy Kyle show would usually feature 3 completely separate cases on its show over the case of about 50 minutes. The layout of this show was about as streamlined as it could get, and it was clearly incredibly popular with viewers as well. The ridiculous and captivating topic descriptions aren't that far off the clickbait you see on YouTube these days, but if they're combined with some of the guests and their reactions, this show could usually back up its extravagant claims. And so they've got you. Hook, line, and sinker. But in order for it to work as well as it did, and so consistently too, corners had to be cut behind the scenes. Here is where the cracks in this already really alarming show begin to emerge. So firstly, let's have a closer look at our guests. To start with, they're all clearly working class and from some of the lowest economic rungs in society. Quite a lot of them were unemployed, poorly educated, and didn't really have many prospects. Many also had mental problems, were struggling with addiction of some kind, or facing debt or money problems. And what I'm getting at is, basically all of these guests on this show, for one reason or another, were vulnerable somehow. I mean, it doesn't take a psychotherapist to see that a lot of the guests on this show were unstable and desperate. So you can already manipulate and exploit these people easier than average. I mean, that's probably half the reason they ended up on the programme in the first place. But on top of that, there's always something that these people seem to need that Jeremy can provide them with. It could be something as simple as justice, answers, closure, but in order to get those things, you might need something like a paternity test or a lie detector test. I mean, sure, you could go out and get these things yourself, but that's far from easy and it's even further away from cheap. Instead, of course, you could go on the Jeremy Kyle show, and for the small cost of being hounded and exploited live on television, you can get your tests for free. Other guests likely saw this show as some kind of path to stardom or out of their own difficult lives and situations. It could be as simple as well as just wanting to get some justice or be vindicated by Jeremy and the audience, to be definitively right in whatever little feud they've got going on in their lives. And this hope made it even easier to take advantage of the guests. The cost for that hope, though, was performing and being mocked on the 21st century equivalent of a Victorian freak show. I don't really need to say much about the treatment of these people on camera. You can find any clip you want on the internet and give it a quick watch, and it's plain to see what's going on. But rest assured, their treatment off camera is just as poor, if not worse, by all accounts. Jeremy and ITV always insisted that their guests had
The checks that take place, the 140-page Bible that was written before the Jeremy Kyle show ever started, the aftercare service that is the best that there's ever been on a talk show.
It seems that that's actually a load of total bollocks. There was little to no psychological screening for potential guests before they came on the show. Several people were on medication or known to have conditions like depression, and they were still just led on the programme willy-nilly, no problem at all. There are accounts of guests being separated into different rooms upon arrival for several hours and being deliberately prodded and poked and riled up before the show starts, with the staff essentially trying to encourage more disharmony, anxiety, and anger between the guests and about the issue they brought on the show. The aftercare is very much similar in the sense that it doesn't fucking exist at all, really, with accounts of guests being pushed into taxis within half an hour sometimes of cameras going off. There were no checkups or follow-up calls of any kind. The best you could apparently hope for was a ring from a producer asking you to come back on and do yet another show. Basically, the Jeremy Kyle show did not give the remotest of fucks. The guests were not treated like guests. They were more like cannon fodder for Jeremy, who holds his guests with a genuine distaste sometimes that cannot be disguised. His demeanour alone screams that he's looking down on them and judging them, and then there's his condescending approach to some of the problems brought on the show as well. There's regular examples of him just shouting at someone, for example with an addiction problem, say, just to get off the drugs and to just stop doing it. And it's like, do you even fucking know how addiction works, dude? You can't just shout at and guilt someone who's got a genuine addiction problem to get off whatever they're addicted to. That's not going to work. That's going to have the opposite effect. Now, Jeremy and the producers of this show at ITV, they're not stupid people. They would be aware of this as well. And so this paints in my mind a clear example of the fact that they just did not care at all. This show was never about giving help. It was just about putting people on camera and essentially exploiting them for money. Jeremy as well clearly has no idea how these people's lives and their problems actually work. His own existence has been so widely different from theirs that it's like another planet to him.
But it's honest, isn't it? I mean, there's the point. You know, we have this debate so much of the time. There's 10 or 15 minutes. What do you want me to do? Sit there and mollycoddle them? At the end of the day, if you're creating a life and not being responsible, you're rushing around the place taking advantage, you're beating people, you're taking drugs, you're drinking, what do you want me to do? It'll be all right. That's why they're in the position they are.
He is the least qualified person in existence to be dishing out this kind of advice. It's like asking your local pastor advice on how to rewire your house. So you've got the treatment before and after. You've got Jeremy and his wonderful way with words. And on top of that, you've got the lights, the camera, the action, the noise, and the angry audience that all follows it up and adds to the pressure. With all that factored in, it's no wonder so many of the guests were super on edge and ready to explode at any second. I mean, you and I probably would be in those kind of circumstances. Keep that in your mind for a few more minutes, actually, just how anxious and on edge you'd feel in that scenario. And while you do keep that in mind, let me tell you how the Jeremy Kyle lie detector test works. Invented in 1921 by John Augustus Larson, the polygraph test is far from a surefire way of just detecting if someone's lying. It's really not that at all. It measures a number of things such as your blood pressure, your pulse, your rate of breathing, and how much you're sweating. And sure, these factors can be indicators that you're lying, but they can also be produced in 1,000,001 other ways too. You don't have to be lying to have a quickened pulse and some sweaty palms. Like, there are many other things that can produce those symptoms as well, like, oh, I don't know, going on the Jeremy Kyle show, being riled up for hours by a load of staff, shoved onto a stage, and then having Jeremy and a live audience berate you. Yeah, that would do the trick pretty well too. Jeremy Kyle and ITV would tell you that their lie detect was upwards of 90% effective. But actually, a polygraph is only somewhere around 55 to 60% accurate. And when you think about it, that's not much more than tossing a coin. There are, rest assured though, much lower estimates for how accurate the polygraph is as well, and since its creation, it has now been widely discredited. Even its own creator, John Larson, came to regret inventing the test, and he wrote this in 1965 about his damned invention. Imagine going on the Jeremy Kyle show, knowing that you're telling the truth deep in your soul, and then Jezza turns around with his card and reveals to the audience that you're lying. It would be fucking monstrous. That would destroy you. You'd never be believed again. Whatever you were hoping to achieve in coming on the show is now so fucked that it will never, ever be resolved at all. And with the accuracy of a polygraph test, it's actually very likely that that could happen.
We asked Harry, did you steal the golf clubs that went missing from your mum's shed? You said no. Why'd you say no?
Telling the truth.
Tess says you're a complete liar.
Harry Henson says this moment started his spiral into depression. He knew he wasn't a thief. The lie detector said otherwise.
I stole nothing!
When it said I was lying, I literally went into this world and I just felt like I was gonna, die.
It does make you wonder how many times they got it wrong on this show and nobody ever found out at all. When you look at it all together, all the pieces of this great fucked up jigsaw puzzle, you realise that every single part of this show, every process, stage and angle of looking at it is completely against the guest. They are promised everything, but all they actually get out of it is mistreatment and humiliation, all to benefit a man and a TV show that could not care less about them. It's exploitation 101, and it went on for 14 whole years. Based on how potently toxic this show's structure and business model was, though, it was bound to go disastrously wrong eventually. To be clear, the show had never exactly been too far from controversy. Over the course of its 14 years, the Jeremy Kyle Show would directly lead to 2 court cases, one in 2007 and one in 2009. And both of those cases were for assault. In the first case, 2 men had gone on the show to seemingly compete for a lover's interest, and one of them headbutted the other. The judge ruled that the show and its producers were at least partially to blame for this happening, describing the show as human bear baiting. In the second case in 2009, a couple had gone on the show over an issue of infidelity, and after their appearance the man had assaulted the woman. He was sentenced for 2 years, and again the judge ruled the show as being partially to blame for this outcome. So it's not like people didn't realise the harm this show could cause. It's just that these cases weren't enough, apparently. Sadly, it would take something even worse to pull the brakes on this nightmare of a TV show. On the 2nd of May 2019, an episode of The Jeremy Kyle Show was filmed starring guests Steve Diamond and his fiancée, Jane Callahan. They had been engaged, but Jane then discovered that Steve had lied about several major parts of his life, most notably that he'd served in the Navy for 10 years. He hadn't at all. When he was confronted with all these lies, Steve's answer was apparently, "I'm not sure why I do this. I just can't help myself." And this answer, in my opinion, is a pretty decent indicator that Steve had some underlying mental health problems that hadn't been addressed. He wasn't well, anyway. And even if he was 100% well when he went on this show, it sadly wouldn't have mattered anyway, because, as we know all too well, the Jeremy Kyle doesn't solve problems like Steve's, it just dramatises them for clicks. After learning of all these lies, Jane grew worried that Steve might have been unfaithful. He insisted that he loved her more than anything and never had, but perhaps understandably, Jane decided she couldn't trust Steve anymore. It was Steve, therefore, that got in touch with the producers and asked to come on the show. He knew Jane watched, she apparently had a lot of respect for Jeremy too, so Steve must have seen it as a perfect way to prove his innocence and save the relationship he clearly cared so much about. When the two arrived on the show, they were separated into different rooms for somewhere around 5 to 6 hours, like many other contestants have attested to. During this time, Steve did the infamous polygraph test that I mentioned earlier, and then, with those results being analysed, the two were invited on the stage and the show began. Jeremy was apparently especially ruthless with Steve during this episode. He was already thoroughly embarrassed, humiliated, and bullied before Jeremy even pulled out the lie detector test results. The results stated, unequivocally, that Steve had been lying and that he'd been unfaithful all this time. Upon hearing this news, Steve apparently broke down and started frantically denying the test results. And from what we know of the polygraph's accuracy, he could well have been right.
An audience member has told 5 News how he reacted when he failed a lie detector test.
It broke down, complete shock. It was just silence. He took a 5 or 10 seconds to process what he just heard. Complete shock, turned around, just sobbing.
Jeremy was having none of it though, insisting that the matter was closed now and denouncing Steve as a serial liar. When Steve still continued to insist that he had been faithful and that the tests were wrong, Jeremy is reported to have quipped, Has anyone got a shovel? And with that, the show was over. Steve had been branded a cheater and a liar, and he didn't have a leg to stand on. He was swiftly whisked out of the studio, and once he got back home, he was pretty much immediately kicked out by Jane. Over the next couple of days, Jane, who was equally upset, apparently got hundreds of texts and voicemails from Steve, who was heartbroken and just desperately wanted to even see her and prove that it was all wrong. Eventually, though, he must have come to the conclusion that there was no hope of that ever happening now. And so, in his rented room not far from Jane's house, he wrote these final words before taking his own life. I hope the Jeremy Kyle show is so happy now. They are responsible for what happens now. I hope this makes good ratings for them. I bet they keep this quiet. Never, never, never did I cheat on you. Never, never. My final words. Steve was found dead on May the 9th, 2019, of a morphine overdose. He was 63 years old. The landlady that found him apparently contacted the show first, who went into full panic mode, moved Jane to a hotel, and started as much damage control as they humanly could. Despite all their efforts though, it didn't take long for this story to surface, and soon every news outlet, radio station and broadcasting platform in Britain was angrily looking at the Jeremy Kyle show. 4 days later, on May 13th, with their hands tied behind their backs, ITV announced that they were suspending the Jeremy Kyle show and its production indefinitely, and removing all past episodes from any broadcasting sites while an investigation was conducted. The investigation didn't seem to last very long though. No more than 48 hours later, this statement was released, that the show was now permanently cancelled. Finally, after just under 14 years of tenure, this disgusting and manipulative show was killed off. The only shame is that it took so long to get it off our screens. Who knows how much untold damage this show could have done to the some 20,000 people that have passed through its doors. So, I reckon I know what some of you are wondering at this point. What the hell happened next? Yeah, sure, the show was shut down May the 15th, 2019, I hear you, but what actually followed that? And most importantly, what the fuck happened to Jeremy Kyle? Well, as is expected with all cowards, Jezza basically ran for the hills the moment the news had fully broken. There were a few corporate statements from his social medias, from ITV, and from the show as well, of course, but after those had been posted, he effectively went radio silent for quite a while. Once the Jeremy Kyle show was shut down, May the 15th, 2019, it took with it all traces, effectively, that it's ever been there. All of its social media pages, all past episodes, from any and all streaming sites you can think of. Within a few days of its cancellation, almost all traces it had ever been there had been removed. As much as it could, ITV seemed to be trying to completely scrub their once prized cash cow out of existence. At first, admittedly, ITV did give some shallow mentions of keeping Jezza on, with some vague words from ITV's bosses about finding another different sort of show for him to do. An investigative series was even proposed for this massive pillock, The Jeremy Kyle Files. How true or sincere any of this actually is, though, is questionable at best. A lot of it sounds to me like the kind of thing your boss would say when they let you go. No, we'll definitely keep you on file and we'll give you a ring as soon as we hear anything. We promise. By the beginning of 2020, any potential new shows with ITV were off the cards for Jeremy. They didn't want him anymore, despite their amicable show of face for the media, seemingly. What with COVID appearing that year too, and locking us all indoors for quite a bit of time, it suddenly became even easier for Jeremy to bury his head in the sand for a while and let things cool down. It wouldn't be until September of 2021, over 2 years after the show went off air, that he appeared out of nowhere on an interview with Talk TV.
He is the one and only Mr. Jeremy Kyle. Jeremy, very good afternoon to you.
Thank you, Mike. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. I'm so delighted to be sitting here because what I understand, from amongst many other things that I don't know about you, is that you've hardly ever been interviewed by somebody, and I've been given the job of actually interviewing you.
How are you
and
feeling?
Finding out, I'm feeling a little bit nervous.
Talk TV was a new independent news channel, formally launched in the UK shortly after that interview in 2022. They would describe themselves as a common sense media station. It was very much right-wing leaning and would like to think that it's no nonsense and taking all of that woke shit out of reporting the news. Just in case you're still not getting the picture, Talk TV are the producers and people behind Piers Morgan's Uncensored show. Originally serving as a fully fledged TV station on the likes of Virgin and Sky, it has since cut back in March of 2024 to a purely online news channel. And the reason it had to cut back is because of its shit viewing figures. So yeah, anyway, Jeremy Kyle, in September of 2021, suddenly appears in an interview with these guys, just as they're really beginning to set up and formally become a news outlet. I mean, it doesn't seem like a coincidence at all here, does it? There's no real, I mean, there couldn't be.
But there will be lots of people who will ask us lots of questions.
Yeah, sure.
Because as you prepare to join the greatest radio station on the planet, right, and also the fastest growing one, by the way.
Quite right, too.
You're
That's
joining
why I'm coming.
at just the right
Yeah,
time.
thank you
because you're
very
going to turbo boost
Timing.
us.
Oh no, wait. Oh, they fucking hired him. Never mind. That was shameless, wasn't it, Talk TV? I mean, fuck me. Well done, you. That was very clever, wasn't it? Did you come up with that all by yourself? Yes, since their big launch in 2022, Jezza has formerly been with Talk TV, doing a radio drive time show and ranting away on their YouTube channel in a manner that Piers Morgan would surely approve of. He doesn't seem to show much remorse for what happened to poor Steve Diamond, and he certainly doesn't seem to have any regrets about peddling his nightmare of a TV show for 14 years. None whatsoever.
It was sudden. There's lots behind what happened, which, as I said, will come out. I think initially, I think I suffered from real shock.
Yeah.
My whole life for 14, 15 years was to the day, to the time, and suddenly that's all gone, right? You think about the people that are associated with the show, or the people that worked on the show, you have that, you know, you think, my God, what are they doing? They've got mortgages to pay, whatever, that plays on your conscience.
He'd have probably been unable to keep his huge mouth closed, and he'd have just told us everything he thought about the situation ages ago. However, there is an ongoing inquest into the Jeremy Kyle show and its cancellation, and that probably means he's got to shut up for a bit longer yet.
When I can talk about what needs to be addressed, I will do it. But
Yeah.
for now, that's not possible.
Yes, there is an inquest going on, by the way, and the latest update I could find was from April 2024, so it still seems to be ongoing, but that's at least a little bit of hope, I suppose. Fingers crossed, with a bit of luck, Jeremy might even get a little bit of accountability thrown his way. Because yes, sadly so far, Jeremy hasn't really had any of that thrown his way at all. He's even claimed that the cancellation of his horrific show has given him anxiety, which is so fucking tone deaf after all the shit that went on during his show that I'm honestly still staggered.
Listen, I've been cancelled.
Yeah.
In this world, it seems now that unless you follow a certain path, you're labelled.
Yes.
Jeremy's narrative is essentially that he was unfairly cancelled by a load of woke losers on Twitter. And yes, cancel culture is pretty toxic. It needs to stop, and it often does target the wrong people for things that aren't true. But you, Jeremy Kyle, are not an example of that. That is complete horseshit, and you know it. Oh, the lies you tell yourself to sleep at night. This wasn't a load of angry libtards getting online and cancelling a show for no good reason. This was a man's life, and Jeremy Kyle is at least partially to blame for the sad fact that that life ended. So then, boys and girls, that'll do it. Thank you very much for watching yet another dysfunctional Moocake mockumentary. I hope you're enjoying them. I'm very much enjoying making them. I've got a couple more planned up already. Haven't started making them yet, but I've got 3 topic ideas that I think you'll be interested in. Similar sort of stuff to this, but in different kind of veins again. So I'll start cooking them up soon, and you should see them within a month and a half, with a bit of luck. But until then, yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Any support you can throw me in this degenerative little channel is much appreciated. Likes, shares, subscribe, all of it adds up, and all of it is immeasurably helpful. Thank you in advance for anything you can do. Anyway, that's it from me. Thank you again for watching. Take it steady. Remember to eat your greens. And also remember, if you have some problems in your personal life, with family, with your lover, with friends, maybe don't take it on national television. Maybe go see a therapist.